Welcome back to the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. I'm your host, Sean, and here we are for another impromptu episode. I've been talking about this subject for a few weeks. I did say I'd do an episode on it, and here we are. It's been something that's been kind of nagging me for a little while. It's the cause and effect of Riyadh season, specifically on British boxing. So you probably noticed over the past, 10 months, 2025 so far, the episodes on the podcast have been few and far between. There's not been as many big fight cards to cover. I mean, that's just my opinion in terms of what I enjoy watching, what I consider to be a big fight card, what I consider to be noteworthy of covering on the show. And the introduction of Riyadh season has been, firstly, fantastic for many reasons. I think the biggest reason for me has been getting the big fights that we wanted to see for some time. But whilst we've been relishing these big fights and some of these great fight cards, behind the scenes, the local boxing scene, the UK boxing scene, has suffered. It really has suffered. Now, I've been involved in boxing media for 8 years. 8 years doesn't seem like a long time in comparison to some people, but in the space of 8 years, there has been a drastic shift in the way boxing and the business of boxing has gone. So when I first got involved in boxing media and I started to learn more about how the small hall shows operate, I didn't realise at that time that a lot of the promoters in the UK take a loss when they're putting shows on. So when I started out in the Northwest, I started out with VIP Boxing Promotions and Steve Wood. Then there's Kieran Farrell when he was promoting shows. Then I would branch out and then we would have my friend Elliot in London who would cover the Steve Goodwin shows. And there was Carl Grieve shows. There was shows up in Scotland, down in Wales. And the recurring theme was that a lot of the promoters either just about break even or if they're lucky, they make some money on it, but most of the time they make losses on shows on putting these small hall events on. Now, this was before the introduction of Riyadh season. If these promoters were lucky, if the fighters were lucky, they'd get the opportunity to fight on an Eddie Hearn Matchroom show or a Frank Warren Queensberry show. And that'd all be based in the UK, and you'd get a lot of people that would come forward from the smaller hall shows onto the TV shows, and it would keep British boxing flourishing. It'd keep shows a little bit more evenly matched, more exciting fights. But now I just feel, since Riyadh season's come into play and it's really swinging its full force around, the UK boxing circuit is really suffering. Right, we're really struggling to get good, high-quality shows anymore. And I'm not disparaging any of the small hall circuit shows. I haven't spoke to any of the promoters for probably a year, maybe 2 years. So I don't know whether they're breaking even, whether they're earning money anymore, whether they're still at a loss. My suspicion is that a lot of them are at a loss still because they want to get their guys out. They want them to be fighting. They want to try and help them make it big because in turn, it'll help them as a promoter, of course. But I suspect that now, because of Riyadh season and the cherry picking that goes on, a lot of these unearthed talents might not be getting the opportunities that they deserve anymore. So it sounds like a really deep layer of conversation, and I've not come to this podcast armed to the teeth with facts and figures and stats. It's just how I feel. This is just the feeling I have about British boxing at the moment. I've been watching boxing since the early 90s, since I was a child. I've grown up watching all the heroes of British boxing throughout the last 30, 35 years. And I used to really get excited about the prospect of a Friday show and a Saturday show. And you'd get to watch some of these great talented fighters come through the ranks, and you'd see them and they'd be chief support, they'd be main event, sometimes they'd be lower down the card, but more of a fuss would be made about them. And you'd get more quality programming on these guys. They'd get their opportunities. They'd get the limelight. They'd get that 15 seconds of fame or whatever you want to call it. But it was exciting to watch. I'm not saying all British boxing shows have been great and the cards have been well matched, because they haven't. There has been cards that are just awful. I totally admit that. And some people will say, well, bloody hell, Sean, what the hell do you want? We're getting the best fights possible. But the compromise is they're going to be part of Riyadh season, and it means they're probably going to be in Saudi Arabia. I just feel like the circuit's suffering. I feel like it's great that we've got these fights. I'm really not complaining about the fact that we've got these great fights, the likes of Bivol Beterbiev, Usyk Fury, all these big fight nights that have happened have been great. It has given some guys fantastic opportunities to make a lot of money, and it's been great for them. And I'm not complaining about that element of it. What I'm saying is, I'm worried about where the British boxing circuit is going to be in the next few years, because at the moment it just feels like it's declining. Obviously, the attentions of the big time promoters are all about these big shows, and since Frank and Eddie started working together, and since the introduction of Dana White and TKO into the mix, and it just feels like, you've got kind of like a group now of individuals within the sport that are pulling the strings, obviously, and that a lot of the local shows now, the smaller promoters, they're just not getting their opportunities there. I honestly thought, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I honestly thought with the introduction of Riyadh season, Turkey Al Sheikh, Ring Magazine all coming together, etc., I honestly thought it'd actually give us a bit of an uplift with these smaller shows. I actually thought a lot of these smaller shows would get more TV time, and they'd get more deals with broadcasters. At the moment, it just feels like real slim pickings for British boxing. I remember the days of Frank Warren cards when you'd be stacked with 7 or 8 fights, and a lot of them were competitive fights, and you'd enjoy watching a full card. Like, I honestly can't say there's been many cards over the past 12 to 18 months that, top to bottom, from a British perspective, have been outstanding, or even anywhere near it. I just feel like they're really struggling to sort of get those primetime events now in the UK. Like, you ask anybody that's lived through the last 30 years of boxing, and they'll probably tell you the same. Like, British boxing just doesn't feel the same anymore. Feels like since the introduction of Riyadh season, Turkey Al Sheikh, Saudi Arabia, Ring Magazine, all this sort of stuff's happened. It just feels like, the origins of British boxing's kind of falling by the wayside. And it all kind of started for me thinking about this a couple of weeks ago when I seen a good friend of mine, Anthony Crawler, doing an interview talking about the same things. It is him that kind of inspired me to want to have this conversation and talk about it, because, as a British boxer himself who reached the echelons of being a world champion, he had to fight his way through all them small shows. He had to force his way onto the telly. He had to take losses in the process to get to the top. A lot of people will probably agree that Anthony overachieved in his career, that nobody thought Anthony would be a world champion, but he did, and he achieved it. And he's done it. But then he's now become a trainer, and he's trying to get talented fighters, on the circuit, and he's finding, like, his conversation is he's finding it's a real struggle now, because, Riyadh seasons took over. They're cherry picking who they want. A lot of the other guys are being left behind. The promoters are leaving the British boxing circuit behind as well. And as a result of that, we are seeing, a decline in the amount of shows that we're getting, amount of sort of premium type shows that we're getting. And they're all going over to Saudi Arabia, and we're getting maybe, 4 or 5 a year, maybe 6. I don't know the statistics, so apologies. If anybody does know the statistics, then, fire away, drop them in the comments. I haven't done that level of research before doing this podcast. Maybe I should have done, but I'm just going off gut feeling and instinct and what I see on social media. I mean, I wonder how many big shows we've had this year in the UK. Like, when we had, like, the generations of the Ricky Hattons, the Cal Frotches, the Kell Brooks, the Kevin Mitchells, maybe, a lot of the fighters from across the country who would headline these shows or be chief support for a lot of these British shows, Eddie Hearn would be there, Frank Warren would be there. We'd have that great rivalry. And I genuinely, like, it sounds bad, but I said years ago I'd want them to work together, and now that they're working together, it's been great for getting the big fights because it's lining their pockets, of course. But then I also feel like when there was more of a rivalry between them as promotional companies, that they were both striving for viewership. They were both striving to be the number one promotional company in the country. And as a result, I felt like we got better shows of that. And I feel like that's the cause and effect of Riyadh season is they don't need to do the quality of shows that they used to do anymore. They don't need to fight each other anymore because they can work together on a lot of shows now. And the money's being given to them by Saudi Arabia. So whilst it's had a fantastic impact in getting big fights there, it's also had a massive effect negatively on the British boxing scene. I genuinely feel that way. And I'll be really interested to hear other people's thoughts on this because it's one of those subjects where it's going to be debatable. People are going to sit there and go, well, what else do you want? You wanted the big fights. You're getting the big fights. What are you complaining for? And you're right. You are right. That's not an invalid opinion. But then I'm also seeing the other side of it as well and thinking, like, I used to get excited for a weekend. I always used to feel like there was a show on nearly every other weekend where there'd be a high quality card presented by one of the big promoters in the country, and we'd get some of these great prospects coming through, and we get to follow their journeys in a more esteemed way. And I just don't feel we have that now anymore. I feel like we're really, really struggling for all of that in the country, and I think that's what's killing a little bit of my love off for that side of boxing. And I'm seeing them changes, and I'm thinking, yeah, it was great. It was a great novelty, but I feel like the novelty's worn off. And like, whilst I won't complain about big fights happening, I'm certainly feeling like, how does it affect the longevity of the sport, especially in our country when we've got a lot of people that go to local boxing gyms trying to strive to be the best they can possibly be? I mean, what's their goal now? Is it just to be a world champion, or is it to just get on a Riyadh card now? Do you know what I mean? Like, are these goals changing for these kids? Are they not kind of seeing the hunger and desire that maybe kids of the last 10, 15, 20 years have saw? Because all they're sort of looking at now is, well, we want to get the money fight, so we just want to get to Riyadh. And that's it. We want to get to Saudi Arabia and get that Turkey Al Sheikh money. For me personally, I don't know where this all lies at the moment. And I'll be interested to hear the thoughts of other professionals in the sport and also other promoters in the sport of how that's affecting them as well, because I genuinely feel it's got to be. It's got to be. I'm absolutely convinced that it's got to be massively affecting them. And I thought, the way social media has got on and the way the streaming platforms have gone, that it would actually help bring more exposure to a lot of these kids coming through. That when I first started in the media side of it, obviously it was right in the thick of obviously the YouTube stuff, and there was all different outlets out there. And obviously, I got involved at that stage, and I had my own outlet in Eat, Sleep, Boxing, Repeat, which is it's still going. But I had that outlet, and I started that outlet up, and I enjoyed going around, and I felt like I was doing a good service by helping provide some of those youngsters and those talented fighters with a platform, a separate platform to cover them on, and seeing some of them shows actually getting live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. And I feel like now we would have been in a position where actually there would have been some of these smaller promotions getting bigger platforms. Obviously, they brought a few things into play, things like Fight Zone. I mean, I don't even watch Fight Zone. Does anybody even watch Fight Zone? Is it still a thing anymore? I mean, is this me just being out of touch with things? I don't know. But I thought when that was introduced, that was going to bring a lot of notoriety. It was going to bring a platform for all these shows to be put on where people will watch it, and it'll start to sort of build that up. But now I just feel like we're not getting that anymore. Sky Sports are only covering so much. Boxer's now gone to the BBC. But if they're not putting enough shows on because they haven't got enough quality fighters to match up against each other or fighters to match up against one another, then it's just going to continue, isn't it? We're not going to see it. The eyes of the nation are not going to get the opportunity to see some of these talented fighters. So I don't know if this whole Riyadh season actually is having this massive cause and effect on British boxing. I feel like it is. I genuinely feel like it is. And on a side note, going into a side subject, I've also been reading, and I don't know how true this is, in regards to the media side of boxing. Apparently, the Ring magazine, Turkey Al Sheikh, are now looking at making Ring the only approved outlet and journalist at ringside for their events, which is going to completely kill off YouTube and completely going to kill off the likes of IFL TV, who have obviously been going since 2010, who have, huge amount of following. They've been going for years. Coogan has been going for years. How is that going to affect people like him who gets his livelihood off it now? And then you've got all the other bigger outlets, like the Boxing News outlet, obviously converted into a YouTube channel, and then you've got all the other sub outlets as well that are there that are trying to achieve something, seconds out. Who else have we got? We've got loads of different ones. I can't even. There's that many of them. I can't even list them off. But I'm thinking about all these big ones. If they're not even going to get the same level of access anymore to fighters and promoters, I mean, how's that going to work? How's that going to affect these big events moving forward? Like, it just doesn't seem right anymore. It feels like there's a narrative being controlled by certain individuals now. Like, they don't want independent journalism involved anymore. They want their only approved journalism involved in the sport anymore. And to me, that sort of gives me red flag vibes, because I feel like then they're controlling the narrative. I mean, people who are conspiracy theories talk about a lot of the media and how they control a lot of the narrative and how they feed into people's psyche and opinions and how it has that influence on them by doing something like that and only keeping a certain outlet available to do the interviews for it. It's bias, isn't it? There's no independent journalism going on here. There's no people asking the difficult questions. Not that a lot of them do, to be fair. A lot of them obviously are scared of losing access, so they won't ask a lot of difficult questions anymore. But it takes away that ability to challenge, that ability to, fight back and say, I'm not happy with this. Have you ever thought about this? And challenge the promoters and challenge the people involved in it. If they take that away, in some ways, they're kind of taking a little bit of free speech away, aren't they? Because you're not providing different journalists to come in there with different opinions, different questions, and actually make these people involved at the top answer them. Why are you doing this? Why are you phasing these people out? There's a lot of people that rely solely upon being able to go to these boxing shows and be there and get these interviews for these views, because these views make them money. So that's going to affect a hell of a lot of journalists and outlets if they're not being given the opportunity to be ringside or given any type of access, or they're only given limited access to certain people and certain fighters. What happened to that? What happened to the freedom of speech and the ability to ask questions, whether they're difficult or not? It's quite concerning that this could be a possibility over the next 6 to 12 months. So that was something else I saw floating around social media. If that comes to fruition, it's really going to kill everything off. It really is. It's going to make people turn away from the sport, because people can see through it, can't they? People can see through the bullshit. People know there's a narrative. People are going to turn away from it and go, do you know what? I'm not listening to this. It's all bias. It's like when people talk about commentary teams and they do fights and they'll say, well, because they work for Sky Sports or whoever, they're biased towards that certain fighter because they fight on this channel. I don't always necessarily think that's true, but in some cases, they probably do have a bias towards a certain fighter. But it's just going to completely make it like that. It's going to be like, you're just never going to give people an opportunity to put themselves out there in the way that they want to put themselves out there without it being controlled. It seems quite excessive. Again, it's just rumour at the moment. Rumour and innuendo. It might not come to fruition, but it actually doesn't surprise me. There is a lot of high-profile boxing journalists out there that are talking about this and putting it on social media, so they're obviously hearing some rumblings about it. I think which is why the Ring magazine was purchased as well by Turki Al Sheikh. They can control everything through the Ring magazine. They can put whatever they want out. They do their own interviews. They get their own people in. Nobody independent can come in and speak to these individuals involved in these fights or these promotions. It just makes it very controlled, and I don't like the prospect of that, to be honest with you. It is quite concerning, and I really do think it kills off the sport. And then obviously you've got this issue of British boxing being affected by all these major fights happening in different countries of the world. Now I get, obviously, some fights are going to happen in Riyadh, and some fights are going to happen in America, because that's sometimes where all the money is for these big fights. I totally get that. That's been a mainstay for many years in the sport. But then, when you can't even get your basic Friday or Saturday night shows with decent headline acts, and you can only get, what, 6 or 7 of those a year in comparison to like 15 to 20 what we used to have, it's really going to kill the sport off in this country. It's going to turn people away, because not only are people wanting to be champions in the country, they want to be central area champions or southern area champions, and they want to go down the traditional route of English and British titles and Commonwealth and European and then world. Like, those elements are kind of going to be taken away from them a little bit, because they're going to see no viable way of pushing their careers forward if there's no audiences to watch these shows anymore, if there's no promotions going on, because promotions at some point are going to even come down even further. Like I said earlier about the promoters, a lot of the promoters that get involved in it are either part of an organization that they have themselves that helps fund these promotions, or they're just going to continue. They're going to crumble. They're not going to be able to keep up with what's going on, because they're not going to be able to pay all the fighters. They're not going to be able to pay all the overheads that get involved in putting a show on, and eventually they'll just walk away from promoting fights and fighters, and they'll just end up being managers or trainers, some of them that are already doing that. And it's like, you're slowly but surely kind of killing off the UK boxing scene. And I know it might seem a little far-fetched to people, the way I'm saying it, the feelings I have. I'd love to hear what other people have got to say on this matter, because I do feel it's something that's slowly waning away. Like this week, for example, I've done a preview for Wardley and Joseph Parker, and obviously that's happening here in this country, and that's a great fight for the country. That's what we need. But we're just not getting any more of this. We're not getting enough of it, and that's my issue, really. We're not getting enough high-profile events going on. And I think boxing fans are kind of turned off by the fact that, what is being proposed as a headline event in the UK would probably be a mid-card fight. And that's no disparaging against those fighters involved. It's just that if the promoters and the fighters have only got what they've got to work with, they're going to sell the shit out of it. Simple as that. They are. They're going to want people to turn up. They're going to want to sell tickets. They're going to want to make money. And I get it, but let's be honest, if a lot of what we're getting in Riyadh, even if like one card filled with 7 really high profile match fights could be delegated into 4 separate events in the UK involving British fighters fighting for certain titles, British boxing would start booming again in that sense. But this is where the cause and effect, the ripples happen, because like, I've loved watching shows where they consistently quality fights all the way through, and it's great. And it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because if you take a few of them fights off them big cards and put them into multiple events, then there's going to be the argument of, well, hang on a minute, you've got one great fight but a really crap undercard, because you've got prospect versus journeyman 6 times over in one main event. And again, that's the other argument. I get it. Like, I'm always like the type of person that will call that stuff out and say, it's crap card, prospect versus journeyman. But I suppose if they can only work with what they've got, what else can they do? What else can they do at the moment? And that's the difficulty with the way boxing's going. So I'd be really interested to hear the thoughts of other people. Do you feel, first and foremost, that British boxing is suffering as a result of Riyadh season? If so, what would you do to change it? How would you change it? That's what I'm asking you guys out there. How would you change it? I want to engage this debate. I've put it out here on the podcast. I want people to comment on Spotify. I want people to comment on social media. You can message, and I can even put a post out separately on social media and see where that goes. But I just felt like articulating these thoughts and feelings via the podcast, because that's how it's making me feel as a British boxing fan. And this is why I'm not covering as much as what I once did on the show, because I don't feel there's enough to cover anymore. Like, David Allen versus Arslanbek Makhmudov 2 weeks ago. People will probably say if that was on another show with it would have been a good chief support fight. That's the way I look at it. But because it was the only real fight that was of interest in the UK recently, it was the only thing I felt I could actually cover. So I'm not going to sit here and try and cover a Northwest show or a London show with prospect versus journeyman fighters. And the reason being, it's not because I don't want to promote these guys or give them any airtime or anything like that. It's just because the guys that listen, you guys that listen to this show, a lot of you are listening for more high-profile fights. You're not listening to me talk about the Northwest. If you're living in Canada or America, you want to hear my thoughts and feelings on big-time events and big-time news. I understand that's the market I have. You don't want to hear me talk about what someone did in London last weekend. Why are you going to listen to that? So obviously it has an effect on what we present as well as a podcast, and also what other podcasts will do. You know, I don't want to scrape the barrel. I want to talk about high-profile events, topical things that are going on, big fights. I want to talk about them. I get enthused by that, about the ability to do that and the ability to talk about these things and debate it with people, and obviously get people on the show who want to talk about these things. So I'd love to know what your thoughts and feelings are on it. Do you feel British boxing's really suffering as a result of Riyadh season and the investment in Saudi Arabia and all the big fights going over there? Or do you disagree and think, you know, Riyadh season has been fantastic and we just have to take the rough with the smooth? That's what I want to know. What are your thoughts on this? Also, the journalism element as well. Obviously, the rumour and innuendo is that no other journalists are going to be allowed ringside other than the Ring Magazine approved journalists. So how does then that affect reporting going forward? I feel it's just going to end up being bias. I don't feel you're going to get independent journalism. Freedom of speech is starting to be taken away in boxing, and that's not good, because you need that. You need someone to upset the apple cart and piss people off. You need people to ask the right questions. And because people are scared of losing access to events, nobody wants to ask the right questions. You'll see an interview with one fighter through 7 or 8 different outlets, and the same things get asked over and over again. Maybe in different ways, but it's the same question. And that's what's going to happen. You're going to get that constantly. What you want to see is people challenging people, not disrespectfully, in a respectful way, but pushing the boundaries, opening up the conversations, questioning things. That's what we want to see. We don't want to be silenced, because it's just not going to help the sport whatsoever. It really isn't. So yeah, it sounds like a bit of a rant, a bit of a moan, but I did say I wanted to talk about this topic, and I've talked about it on the show. So as always, you know where to find me on social media at BTR Boxing Podcast on all social media platforms. Please let me know. I'm going to wait to hear from a couple of you first, and then I might stick a post out on social media about it. I think that would probably be a good shout, and see what other people come up with. Obviously, when you put it out to the world on social media, you're going to get all sorts of different responses. So it is going to be interesting. It's going to open up a massive debate, and I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing what people actually come back with, because I know there's a lot of like-minded boxing fans out there, like me, that will feel it, that will understand it, that will have a good solution to some of these problems and good thoughts and feelings on it. But I think if nothing gets said about it and we don't talk about it, how is it ever going to change? We're just going to have to accept what's being spoon-fed to us all the time, and it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way at all. So, that is it for the episode. Bit of housekeeping before I go, as always. The latest Mike Tyson episode is available, part 4. Please go and listen to it if you haven't already. And the previous 3 parts, there's 4 parts there. Part 5 is coming very, very soon as well. If you've not subscribed to us on YouTube, please go and do that as well. It does help. I'm talking about this in this show. You know, YouTube does help. I put all the podcasts on there. The more views it gets, of course, the potential to earn money it is for the podcast, and the money that earns from the podcast then goes back into the podcast. It always has done. That's how I've been able to get great artwork and great research and great scripting done, because of that investment into the podcast. So please continue to do that. It really, really genuinely helps. But if you want to support the podcast in any other way, recommend it to people. Tell people about the other shows that we do. We have a lot of niches. We have the Career Profiles podcast. We have the Legendary Nights podcast and the Dark Side of Boxing podcast. 3 completely separate parts of the boxing world, different historical conversations going on, different stories. I love doing all that. I know there's a lot of people that are trying to become, so-called boxing historians now, and they're picking up great followings through doing so. But please continue to support us. We've been here for a long time. We continue to do it. We continue to push the envelope with what we do, and we continue to bring you stories that you haven't heard before. So please continue to support, as always. So that's it from me. Thank you for listening, as always, to the show. And I'll be back next week with a reaction show to Fabio Wardley and Joseph Parker, plus obviously more upcoming fights. We've got Conor Benn, Chris Eubank rematch coming up, so there'll be shows coming up for that also. But for now, I'll leave you with all this. Food for thought. Let me know your thoughts on it. Thank you. I'll see you next time.